So I did a video a little over a week ago now on what I felt Far Cry 6 did right. It was a video where I talked about all the positives of the game and the new additions and changes I liked, but now, it's time to talk about what Far Cry 6 did wrong. It is now time to rip this game apart. But of course, this is all just my opinion, and feel free to let me know what you feel Far Cry 6 did wrong in the comments. But getting right into it, I feel there was a lot that was wrong with the story of Far Cry 6, mostly with the antagonist of the story. Now, I'm not talking about Anton, we'll get to him later, but I'm talking about the side villains. The side villains are one of, if not my biggest gripe with the story. They're extremely generic and plain out forgettable. I'm literally having trouble just recalling some of their names. They either fit some basic stereotype or hardly have any character traits and are just plain evil and only exist to fill time and give you somebody to kill. And I've said this several times in my other Far Cry 6 videos, but this is something Far Cry 5 did so much better. The Seed family were great antagonists. Every one of them had their own personality, motives, effects, and influence on the story and characters. You could actually understand why they are the way that they are. And I remember John, Jacob, and Faith Seed very well, even though it's been a while since I've replayed Far Cry 5. It hasn't even been a year since I've played Far Cry 6, and I've pretty much forgotten most of the side villains. They aren't interesting at all. No good clear motives or character traits. They just feel like filler there to inflate the story and serve as stepping stones before you get to the big bad Anton Castillo. Which naturally brings me to my next issue with the story, and that's Anton Castillo. He actually suffers from a fairly similar issue as the side villains, and it's really unfortunate because he had so much potential, especially with someone like Giancarlo Esposito voicing the character. He too feels pretty generic as far as an antagonist goes. A leader or tyrant who's trying to make Yara into paradise, as he says about 1,000,000 times during the game, off the backs of the poor and innocent people of the country. His character is like Pagan Min, but without any of the backstory or understanding that made Pagan such a multi-layered antagonist. And the tragedy with Anton is the potential is absolutely there. He very briefly mentions his childhood and how his father was the president, a clear mirroring between him and Diego and how the relationship between Anton and his father was. And I wish we could have seen that, or at least learned more about Anton's upbringing. It's like, yeah, we get it. Anton wants to build a paradise for his people, but we don't really understand Anton, and rather than trying to get you to understand and possibly even agree with the antagonist like most Far Cry games do, instead every scene with Anton is some evil monologue or how he's being a terrible father to Diego. Not to mention most of his scenes are taking place elsewhere and he hardly interacts with Danny in the story, and by the time the story is over it just feels like there should have been more. I'm sorry if I suck at explaining this, but we didn't get enough Anton. We didn't get enough insight into his character or why he's doing the things he does, and again he feels like a generic villain sometimes. Then of course there's also the complete overuse of tropes and stereotypes in the story with so many of the characters. I feel like when they were writing a lot of these characters, Ubisoft was thinking they're supposed to be charming and funny, but to me at least, they were really annoying. I could hardly connect with any of the characters in this story, and some of them just have some ridiculous and wacky personalities that are more annoying than charming. The side characters just aren't likable, and it's hard to care or be invested in them. So for me, that's why such a big chunk of the story felt boring or consistently made me lose interest. Not to mention the whole plot of being part of a resistance that fights back against a tyrant has been done to death. It's literally been done in this series already. There's a lot of issues with the story, and it was definitely one of the biggest letdowns for this game for me. I know a lot of people also didn't like how it feels copied and pasted from the previous games in terms of gameplay, and that wouldn't have bothered me as much if the story was actually engaging. Of course, there are some obvious issues with the gameplay in Far Cry 6 as well, and easily the biggest one for me is the difficulty. This is by far the easiest Far Cry game I've ever played. Now, they did just recently add a new difficulty option called Guerrilla Mode, which I've yet to try, but I heard it's actually significantly harder than Action Mode, but hopefully that fixes this issue. Those of you who've tried it, let me know in the comments, but to actually use it, you have to start a new game. In the Action Mode, which is supposed to be the harder difficulty when compared to Story Mode, which were the only two options on launch, is far too easy. The bullet types definitely didn't work as intended, considering you can throw armor-piercing rounds on any weapon and easily kill any enemy type with a headshot. It made the game a breeze to get through, and without any challenge, it started to get disengaging and pretty boring. And that's when the repetition and tedium with the Far Cry formula really started to set in for a lot of people. We should have had harder difficulty options on launch. It's pretty ridiculous that we didn't, considering it's been a thing in Far Cry for so long. I also didn't like how Far Cry 6 didn't include some of the new fun features that Far Cry 5 included, like being able to pick up, use, and throw melee weapons, for example. I have no idea why they removed that. A lot of people, including myself, really enjoyed that system. I'm also just not a fan of the ranking system in general. I don't like how certain sections of the map are locked off at the start, like the capital city of Esperanza. I also really disliked the HUD changes. Enemy health bars and a mini-map was a completely unnecessary change. In Far Cry 5, the mini-map was removed in order to tone down the UI and make the game feel more immersive, which I feel worked really well, and then they go and add it right back in Far Cry 6. Not to mention, you can still tag and spot enemies. It's not like you can't see enemies without the mini-map. And as for navigation, Far Cry 5 just had a visible waypoint on the actual roads, so again, a mini-map wasn't needed. I know this is kind of controversial for some people. I just personally don't like an invasive HUD and the excessive hand-holding it can entail, but of course you can turn that stuff off, so it's not like it's a huge deal, but I still thought it was worth pointing out. But that about wraps up some of my major issues with Far Cry 6 and what it did wrong. Again, this is all my opinion, and feel free to leave what you feel Far Cry 6 did wrong in the comments as well. And again, the whole point of this video was to point out what the game did wrong. I don't hate Far Cry 6 by any means, and feel free to check out my video on what the game did right if you haven't yet. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you considered leaving a like and subscribing to the channel if you're new. I've made a lot of Far Cry videos here. I just ranked all the games not too long ago as well, so feel free to check that video out. But other than that, thanks for watching everyone, and have a great rest of your day.